Okay, let's start up, shall we? Morning. So today I'm going to try to round out our discussion of taxonomy so that we can move on to other things. Please be mindful of the fact that there's going to be there's a participation grade today. There was also one last time, which I didn't really mention. Hopefully you looked in Canvas and saw that it was there. If you missed it, let me know, and I'll make sure you can do that. There's going to be a quiz on Friday. The optional reading, just in case I mangled my discussion of cod too badly, you can get the gist of it by looking at this article on cod. I'm sure you have nothing but time to think about codfish and their fisheries, but there's an article called The Good, the Bad, and the Rebuilding. It's just an online article from University of Washington. It talks about their work on that fishery, and it's easy read, and it clarifies perhaps some of the stuff that you might be confused on. I will be asking a question on the exam about the cod fishery because I spent so much time on it, and because it's one of the few times I've been able to focus on fisheries. So do make sure you understand it. If you don't, come bug me. Speaking of bugging me, office hours are going to be online only today from 1 to 3, and the link is right there on that page. So here's where we're at in terms of the quarter. Today, I'm going to hurriedly move us through most of the remaining taxonomy that we have, which is the Acanthopterygians. And then we only have days left, and you get to escape. I feel like I overpromised in terms of what I wanted to do. But on Friday, I'm going to talk about rockfishes specifically and the rockfish ecology and how it's related to the California current and longevity and growth and fisheries. And that'll be a segue into Monday's discussion on marine fisheries and marine fisheries ecology. Wednesday, I'll probably finish up that discussion on fisheries, and poems are due next Wednesday. So that's just a week away for the poetry. On Monday, Christine Parasek is going to come in and talk about her research on alpine lake fisheries. And I've seen an earlier version of that talk. It's quite interesting and quite different than some of the other things that we've talked about. And then on Wednesday, I'll talk about freshwater fisheries and conservation, which is part of the name of the class. And it seems like I've been able to spend so little time on it. And then the blog is due on that Wednesday. So 2 weeks away is your group blog. And then Friday, I'll talk a little bit about job opportunities and fisheries work. We'll have the Fish Poetry Slam and the attending awards. And then I get to leave you alone for a week until the final exam. I think it's the last of it's like the last day of final exams, probably one of the last exams given in the afternoon. So it'll be from 3:30 to 5:30. In this class, if you want a space to work on it, I'll be here. It's a quiet space and you can ask me questions, but it's not due until midnight. And it's the same kind of format as before. I'll probably have 10 less multiple choice questions just because they were dazzling in their variety and because I hate writing multiple choice questions. But I'll have about 10 less multiple questions, and I'm going to add an essay question, okay? Which is what you need the most work on anyway. And that's it. That's what we have left. So any questions about the schedule? Yes. I'm sorry, what? Yeah. I mean, unless you wanted to open it. Yeah, you know what? For your sake, open it up at 3:30. One of the problems with the midterm is that there was just too much time and you didn't know whether to write a novella or a few sentences for the essay questions, right? So in a way, I've worked at cross purposes. I wanted to make it as flexible as possible. And instead, I gave you like an entire 12-hour block of stress. So preferably I give you like 4 hours to do it and just leave it. But since some of you are expecting that block of time, I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm not going to extend it, okay? And really, just while we're on the topic, yeah, I want, for the essay questions, as I said before, it's all about synthesis. It's not about the details. It's about a clearly articulated article, a clearly articulated idea expressed in a few paragraphs with a topic sentence and supporting statements, 3 paragraphs at max. And yeah, that's about all I have to say about that. Okay, so it'll open up at 3:30 in this classroom and you can take it from there. All right, this is my dog Ozzy. He's very friendly. He likes to be petted. He's a little bit of an attention. He's a little bit of an attention hound. So, you can always push him away too. But feel free to love him up. So, so I finished up last time talking about the Acanthopterygian fishes, and you were distracted because you needed to get the heck out of here. It's probably the most diverse group of fishes, over 260 families. And these are the classic spiny finned fishes. They're sort of the, in a way, they're kind of the paragon of teleostean evolution, in that they've taken all these teleostean characteristics and taken them to another extreme. And as such, it's provided a whole suite of opportunities for them to sort of adaptively radiate into these weird body morphologies and occupy these weird habitats and speciate endlessly. And so we'll talk about the details of that. It really hangs around the fact that they've got these spiny fins, which helps them, well, mostly it helps them evade predation. It gives them a little predator defense from those spiny rays. And also it allows them to manipulate their environment and manipulate their bodies in the environment more effectively as well. And their jaw, their upper jaw, is extremely flexible with an ascending process and a descending process that forms the front end of their mouth up here. Excuse me, that's a carp. That's a cyprinid. So the cyprinids have the kinethmoid bone, which allowed a little bit of flexibility in the maxilla and the premaxilla, and the up here on the top, the Acanthopterygians have a premaxilla with an ascending process here and a descending process right there, and that just allows them to do all kinds of weird stuff with their mouth that other fishes would not be able to do. Oh, good. And then on top of that, they have advanced pharyngeal dentition. So they've got the outer side of the mouth, the maxilla, to actually grab stuff and manipulate it. And they've got the pharyngeal jaws deep inside the mouth to be able to manipulate food and masticate food and be able to swallow it. And they have like sophisticated levers, hinges, musculature, and bones that all support that. And then they have the typical kind of teleostean characteristics. They mostly have ctenoid scales as opposed to cycloid scales that you tend to see. So it's an adaptation in sort of the specificity of the function of the scales. And they have physoclistic swim bladders, which allow them a lot of flexibility in terms of the habitat. They're not confined to the surface. They have 2 dorsal fins typically. They've got a spiny dorsal and a soft rayed dorsal. Sometimes they're connected, sometimes they're not. That's important identification. And then their pectoral fins are up high on their lateral sides. And the pelvic fins are way up on the anterior, helping them to manipulate their bodies through their environment. And one of the striking things about these fishes is they're really a post-KT extinction fish. They're quite young in that they're pretty much confined. Their radiation of this group occurred in the Cenozoic period. And I put a ray troll pile of geologic time here on the left side. So you can see like basically where your Devonian fishes were back, 500 million years ago. The percomorph, or the Acanthopterygian, and the labels up here on the top are a little different than the taxonomy that we studied, so pay no attention. The Acanthopterygian fishes, which include these 2 groups, pretty much evolved in the last 65 million years, which is after the KT extinction. Presumably, that opened up a whole bunch of new habitat space for them to radiate and develop into. And apparently there was some competitive pressure as well among individuals, which would be presumably responsible for the evolution of those those spines, those monster-sized spines. So let's dig into it. The first group, so there's two sort of main groups of the, let me see if I can find it here. So there's two main groups in the Acanthopterygians. There's series Atherenomorpha, which includes these three groups in blue. And then there's the series Percomorpha, which includes the rest. And they're taxonomically sort of divided. Perhaps it's supported by genetics, maybe it's not. It's unclear, but certainly in terms of body plan and morphology, they've been traditionally just differentiated. And you don't really need to know that except as a kind of way to structure these many orders that I'm asking you to be aware of, to know. So the first few groups I'll talk of are the Atherenomorpha. And the first order in that, the main order that I want you to be aware of are the Atherenioforms. Family Atherenopsidae are the silversides, the New World silversides. And probably the two most common fishes we saw some at Bodega Bay, if you're out there standing with us, are the top smelt, which are a marine fish that's affiliated with bays and estuaries. You can see the body plan. They have a slightly superior mouth. They feed up at the surface and they feed plankton. They're mostly a surface-oriented fish. They're really important for the food web. And their congeners, the jack smelt, which have a very, very similar lifestyle, but they tend to live offshore a little bit more over kelp forests. Those are the two marine versions that one's most likely to encounter of this family. The freshwater version, which is good to know if you live in California, are the Mississippi silversides, Atherenops berylina, which was a Southeast North American fish, has been introduced to California, as you can see in the distribution map here. And they become quite a problem here. So they essentially have moved into some of the niches that were occupied by native fishes, in particular Delta smelt. They seem to be certainly somewhat competitive, potentially in terms of food. And they also prey on the eggs and larvae of Delta smelt. One of the factors that probably makes Delta smelt recovery almost impossible. Although I heard that they're letting Delta smelt out in cages next month. A friend of mine is going to be working on that. Poor guy. Well, it'll be interesting to see. Anyway, so Mississippi silversides, all these species are characterized by the silver stripe that goes up the side. They're really beautiful fishes. And then one other group are the California grunion, and everybody should know about the grunion. This is kind of a Cali phenomenon. They spawn from March through August, particularly around March, April, and May. Those are their peak months. They come up about 3 or 4 days after the full moon, so they're lunar cycles, and they basically ride the highest waves up as far up on the beach as they can, which is where the females dig their tail into the sand and the males wrap themselves around and release sperm. And then the female and the male take the next big wave back out, and 10 days later, actually about a month later, or maybe less, the embryos will hatch into juveniles and they'll hang in wait for a wave disturbance. And so another spring tide, a series of high tides following possibly the new moon, because it's a lunar cycle. So you get the highest tides on the full moon and on the new moon. So if they spawn just after the full moon, they're going to be ready to go back into the water on the new moon, which is the next series of high tides. Evolution, it's amazing. And so the babies, once they get hit by these series of waves, they'll wriggle up out of the sand and they'll ride those waves out. And it's really kind of a thing. For years, people have gone out to catch them either for bait or for eating. The regulations require that no tools be used. So you can't use nets, you can't use buckets. Well, you can use buckets to stir your catch, but you can't scoop. You've got to use your hands. And so people go out and they grab fishes by their hands and toss them in their buckets and take them off to do whatever they want with them. So it's kind of a scene. And now, you okay there, Ozzy? You okay? It's kind of a scene. And now people actually just go up just to watch them. It's really cool just to watch them wriggling on the sand. And to give you kind of an idea of this, I've taken a chance on the video. So there's the female in the middle. And the males are writhing around her. It's a little strange. And why is that funny? And those are the eggs inside the hole there. And they'll ride the next wave out. So why is that funny? Okay, wait, we're seeing it again? I don't want to see it again. Stop. Okay, here's another one, I think. This is more from this is like the whole scene. They call it a run. It's the Grunion run. And there you see the waves coming in with bazillions of Grunion. Crazy. It's just all up and down the beach. And this has been a California thing for like, you know, people were like, free food, it's washing up on the beach. And they go out and nail it. It's kind of an extraordinary thing. The thing that's so neat about it is that it's so darn predictable. You can go to like the website of any SoCal aquarium and they'll give you the Grunion run schedule. And so you can plan it on your calendar when you're going to go out and see them. And they're that predictable. Okay, I'll move on now. I'll let go. Okay, so that's the blah, blah, blah. That's the blanking, the Atheriniforms. They just told, and the Atheranopsidae, just totally brain farted there. And the next group are the next group is the order Cyprinodontiforms, and I spelled it wrong. Cyprinodontiformes. Did I spell it wrong? Yeah, sorry about that. I spelled it incorrectly. It's Cyprinodontiformes, so it's R-I-N-I, Dontiformes. And I'll correct that before I post these slides. And it's, so you can see it here correctly spelled in the family, Cyprinodontidae. It's quite a mouthful, at least for me. And these are the pupfish. The pupfish are very interesting species. The ones that I have showcased here are the highly endangered devil's hole pupfish, of which there's only about 100 individuals left. They live in one little pool in the desert. The species is about 160,000 years old, which is really not very old. It's just barely older than your younger sister. It's not a very old species in the relative scheme of things. They were able to occupy this particular hole probably when it opened up due to some kind of an earthquake, and then the groundwater filled it up. It's completely isolated. It's about 130 meters deep. The fish live on a shelf up on the top 24 meters. There's a little shelf just below the surface where the water is about 91 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's extremely warm. And they've evolved to this really rare habitat. There are different pupfish all scattered throughout the desert, and they're all very closely related, and each species tends to live in a different isolated hole. Well, this particular species became the most endangered species of fish in the world when ranchers nearby began depleting the groundwater for cattle mostly. A series of earthquakes hit that disrupted the flow of water and essentially the condition of habitat inside the, so a giant earthquake in Mexico, which was like back in 1980s, 1990s actually, set up a standing wave inside this pool, which rocked it back and forth, and it moved all the algae that was growing on the shelf off. And it forced them to spawn a very unsuccessful spawning. They're also susceptible to flash floods. And in the past 10 or 20 years, a predaceous diving beetle was introduced to prey upon the larvae and eggs. And then there are people, there's yahoos that occasionally get in and try to just mess it up because they're opposed to federal intervention. A bunch of drunk guys went in there and barfed in the pond, which is like kind of funny, but kind of pathetic too. And then occasionally the scientists muck it up. There was one event where there was a flood and the equipment fell in. They have a bunch of monitoring equipment, which you can see in the lower right here, and the equipment fell off and landed on the shelf, and it killed like 80 pupfish. So, so these pupfish, these dogs, kind of have it out for them. So in an effort to kind of mitigate the damage, they tried to move the population to different facilities. So they sent them to different, Steinhardt Aquarium in San Francisco got a population. They sent one to a casino in Vegas because Steinhardt couldn't make it grow. And the casino was like, we got money. They both died. They're desperate to start a refugial population. So what they did finally, the only way they could get them to grow in captivity is to build an exact replica of the pool that they live in inside a housed facility. And that seems to be working somewhat. But I mean, it's a replica right down to the shapes of the rocks and the structure. It's like they took a cast of it. And they seem to be establishing a refugial population, but one wonders what they're going to do with it if the species dies. So, of course, it's created quite a lot of controversy because there are people who are like, you know, kill the pupfish. Let us have, you know, local rights, grazers rule. And why are we spending millions of dollars on the pupfish? And then there are, you know, the enviros and the agencies, which are like, no, you got to save the pupfish. So down there in the desert, it's become sort of a controversy. Another twist on the controversy is that in one of the refugial populations, the Margosa pupfish was accidentally introduced. One or two pupfish of a different species was actually introduced. And this slight introduction to a population of about 100 made the hybrids grow pelvic fins, which the desert pupfish don't have pelvic fins. And they started reproducing like gangbusters. Suddenly they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of baby pupfish. Why? Hybrid vigor, right? This is a very isolated bottleneck population. It probably has a number of deleterious alleles packed into its DNA. And, you know, essentially it's almost like an ephemeral species. And so a lot of people argue, if you want to keep that gene, that set of genes, like what's more important? Is the pupfish the most important thing? Or is set of genes important to create diversity, heterogenetic diversity that allows the whole complex to be able to persist? Well, nobody knows. And so the US Fish and Wildlife Service is, you know, exploring a variety of options to try to keep them alive, including the backup facility and possibly another backup facility with a refugial population. Of course, they have ongoing monitoring. They've improved security so people don't barf in the pond anymore. And then the possibility of a hybrid population that sort of keeps that gene stock alive along with its extra pelvic fins. So it's a really interesting controversy. And for your participation credit, I'd like you to just jot down a few thoughts on how you feel about using hybridization to be able to save an endangered species. This is not the only case where this has been brought up. Florida panthers, for example. You're nodding your head, yes, Amelia. What do you know about Florida panthers? Do you know much about it? Yeah. And they basically use puma, used a puma to hybridize the population and so kind of preserve the genetic stock while transplanting it back to its original habitat in Florida, hoping that the habitat hasn't changed enough and it allows the species to persist. So anyway, you know, there are other examples of this as well, but these are probably two of the most high profile examples. And so for your participation, please just jot down a few of your ideas on it, kind of formulate some thoughts on it first, because I don't think there's a simple solution. I certainly don't have it. What is the point of the Endangered Species Act? Are we producing species? Are we preserving species? Are we preserving genetic diversity? Are we preserving habitat? These are big philosophical questions that at this point in time, I don't think we have great answers for. But anyway, I just want you to think about that, jot down a few ideas. Also included in the Cyprinodontiformes, which I again misspelled there, apologize, are the family Fundulidae, which include the California killifish, and the family Poecilidae, which are the live bearers. That includes guppies and mosquito fish. These fish are all live bearers. Mosquito fish are probably the most common fish in the world because they're in the lower right down here. Whoops, so sorry. They're in the lower right. They're the most common fish in the world because they're used for mosquito abatement districts. This is the killifish up here, which looks very, very similar, except for the placement of the dorsal fin, which is far behind the pelvics here. You can see that's the main identification. And then this is a swordtail, which is a common aquarium fish. It's related to guppies. And they're mostly, that group of fishes mostly comes from Central and South America, tropical fishes. Okay, next order, the Baloniformes. There are 6 families in this, and they're known mostly for Exocetidae, which are the flying fish. The flying fish are notable because they have this reverse heterocercal tail, and their body can sort of lock in place and become quite rigid while flying across the surface of the water. They don't really fly, they just kind of hover. But the wings have a recurved shape, which are much like bird wings, or yeah, they're much like bird wings in terms of using the flow of air to give them additional lift. And then they use that heterocircle, that reverse heterocircle tail to propel them across the surface of the water, usually when escaping predation. Very cool species. We have a population off the coast of California here as well. And occasionally they fly up in your boat and bang around. That's the Exocetidae, order Baloniformes. And then the order Perciformes. And I guess this is, just a break here. So that's the last of the Atherinomorphs. Those are the 3 general orders, the Baloniformes, the Cyprinodontiformes, and the Atherinomorphs. Those are the 3 main orders that you should know that represent the series Atherinomorph. And now we're going to go to series Percomorph. What makes a percomorph? Well, it's a fish that's kind of shaped like a fish. It's a big garbage can group. And at the top of the garbage can series is order Perciformes. Perciformes has a whole bunch of throwfish thrown into it because they look like fish. They look like perch. They're kind of ovoid shaped and they've got fins and they swim. So it's a really it's a paraphyletic group. And it's where we throw fishes taxonomically that we can't figure out where to put any other place. And it includes the snappers, a popular ocean fish for eating and common on reefs. It includes the perches, which is a common freshwater fish across North America. It includes the sunfishes, which Andrew Ripple talked about in the recorded lecture last week, and also the goatfishes, which are an important food source in other parts of the world in tropical and semi-tropical areas. Locally, it includes the Zoarcoideae. The Zoarcoideae are very beautiful, cool reef fishes that include the monkey-faced prickleback, which if you were down at Half Moon Bay with us, you might have seen some folks there with bamboo poles, dangling squid along crevices. They're hunting for monkey-faced pricklebacks. A really cool and beautiful species that hide out in shallow water and basically hide in the crevices. They're ambush predators. They wait and they capture food as it rolls by, including squids, in which the food they're trying to capture captures them. Also a penpoint gunnel, which I believe we saw when we were seining down there, a rockweed gunnel, and a black prickleback. These are all very closely related in the same family, and they're somewhat difficult to tell apart, but they're all reef fishes, recently evolved and very, very much adapted to living inside the rugged reef structure of the California coast, the Central California coast. A similarly adapted species to the California coast are the Embiatosids. This is a really important family. They're the surf perches. And here's a few examples of common surf perches that you'll probably encounter. The Shiner surf perch with the yellow mottled bars on the side is one of the species that we caught in Half Moon Bay. The walleye surf perch is another really characteristic species. They've got that giant eye and the barring. And then the tule perch, which is the one freshwater variation of the surf perches. This again is a very young family. They're only a few million years old, which you can see up here in this diagram. You know, many of the fishes that we've been studying, you know, are like 60 million years old. That's the age of this particular group. And these guys are, you know, really less than 1 million years old in some cases. And more often, somewhere around here, about, you know, 5 to 4 million years old. So it's a very recent species. And in some ways, you could say that they evolved with the evolving California coastline. As it uplifted, emerged out of the sea, and a series of reefs emerged that got scraped off the Pacific plate and shoved onto the North American plate. These fishes were among the many species that were able to evolve and radiate and take advantage of that newly forming habitat well within the past 30 million years, although it's just kind of miraculous to me that it's such a short period of time. One of the cool things about surf perches is that they give live birth. And down here, and this is the tule perch, which is the freshwater version. It's found in the Russian River and in the Sacramento drainage. This is a female who's giving birth in his hands right now. They come out fully formed and ready to feed. And the way that they do this is that they have this well-developed uterine-like structure. It's not a true uterus in that it can't develop a placenta and an umbilical cord that's attached to the larvae, but rather it's the wall of the oviduct, so down from the ovaries. And the wall of the oviduct is shaped in such a way that it's highly vascularized and it surrounds the larvae and it promotes exchange with them. And you can see here is a sort of poor dissection of the oviduct. And you can see it's got a series of pockets, and inside, these are the larvae from that pocket. And then from pocket 2 and 3, they're distributed inside these chambers. And I'm going to kind of draw here what it looks like more or less in cross section. Essentially, the ovary has this kind of a shape, forming these and this is uniquely surf perch. And inside the pockets, the larvae grow. That's a little larvae face. And they have a dorsal fin and an anal fin that's really extended and highly vascularized. So that's a little fish that's looking at you. There's this face, a little happy face and eyes there. And so you can't really see it because of this chromie pen. There it is, looking at you like that, all throughout these chambers. And the dorsal and anal fin have this high degree of vascularization, as does the wall of the oviduct. And so oxygen and wastes and food resources are exchanged through the fluid inside the oviduct. And the babies are born quite large. They're really kind of packed in there. And they squirt right out when the fish is ready or when they get stressed when you catch them. Any questions about that? Yeah. I couldn't hear, I'm sorry. No, that would be oval. Oh, I'm sorry, you're totally right. Oh God, I'm messing you guys up. I apologize. You okay? Thank you for the correction. It's viviparous. Oviparous is eggs. Viviparous is live. Ovoviviparous are eggs that hatch inside the female. Thank you so much for the correction. And I'll correct that on the slides. And on Monday of next week, I'll talk a little bit more about reproduction and I'll clarify that once again for you. Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah. The pockets. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. You're just increasing surface area so that exchange can proceed. Okay. So basically there's about 23 species of tule perches and they're all concentrated on the west coast of North America. And the main concentration is right off the California coast. And you can see from this, so this shows the main species of tule perch here stacked up. And it also shows the taxonomic relationships, the phylogenetic relationships among them, which I'm not going to get into. But the key thing is here is that this color bar shows you the intensity, like the number of species. So red are the most species and blue is the least. And so the main region that's dominated by the highest diversity of these species is right off California, particularly off this part of California, sort of the central part of the distribution, which is the top of the California Bight, right off the coast of like around Santa Barbara. And the interesting thing about this is that it almost seems like sympatric speciation, you know, which used to be not thought possible. There's two different types of speciation. There's allopatric speciation, which is when, you know, a mountain range forms and two populations get divided and they speciate separately. They move in different directions. Well, increasingly, sympatric speciation, which is something that occurs where populations are commingling, but somehow differentiate and exploit new or different environments, seems to be a pretty common thing, especially in the Acanthopterygians. And the tule percher, the surf perchers are a great example of that. It seems that they've been able to differentiate by spatial differentiation, both in terms of the latitudinal gradient that they exist across the California coastline. And because California extends such a large gradient of habitat, there's a lot of different, like, sort of temperature, thermal, and physical structures that they could exploit differently. They also differentiate habitat spatially in a vertical sense. They orient to kelp forests, they orient to rocky shores, they orient to other kinds of hard structure, they can orient to the bottom, they can orient to the surface. Tule perch moved upstream, so their distribution is largely a salinity differentiation in that one case. They can also exploit different kinds of food sources, which allows them to differentiate into essentially a different kind of niche. And they also differentiate habitat temporally by using different periods to spawn. All these different sort of elements of their environment have allowed them to radiate and then to maintain separate species, reinforced spatially, temporally, physically, and by ocean conditions. And I want to talk about the idea of ocean conditions a little bit because it's really key to understanding the diversity of marine resources that we have in California. We have two main currents off the coast here. There's the Davidson current, which is this red line that's moving along the coast up to the north. The Davidson current is the current that dominates in winter, and it's largely responsible for the temperate conditions that we have in California. It's a sort of slightly warmer water current. And in the spring and summer, the Davidson current retreats a little bit, and the California coastline is dominated by the California current, which comes from up north, and that's responsible for the cool coasts that we have and the warm interior and the contrast between those two. So you get these foggy summers because that cold water current is hitting the coast, combined with upwelling. So you get in the spring and summer, the California current is creating this downward flow of water from north to south. And at the same time, upwelling, which is driven by wind patterns. As winds tend to dominate from the northwest, it creates essentially a movement of water. Water moves at a 90-degree angle to the pattern of the wind because of the Coriolis effect. And so you get this ocean, essentially water starts to move in this direction offshore. And as the surface water moves away, you get cold bottom water that comes up, which brings a lot of nutrients and supplies a lot of the sources for an enhanced food web off the California coast. So you get water moving in really weird ways. And one of the and then on top of those patterns, the seasonal patterns, there's the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which also drives the strength and directionality of these currents. So during El Nino years, erase some of this. Go ahead. Okay, in El Nino years, you get essentially there's this slow wave of warm water that starts in the tropical Pacific and moves east and then hits the Americas and spreads north and south. So what that means for California is that you get this slow giant wave of warm water that's heading up north. And that often brings a tremendous amount of rain because it's so energy fueled. It brings a lot of rain down here to Southern California, and it tends to lead to a drought up here. In the La Nina pattern, it's the opposite. That standing wave reverses and moves off to the west to the tropical Pacific, and it changes the direction of the current so that you have water moving from north to south. And we're actually in a La Nina pattern right now, which probably explains the Thule fogs that we've been getting, which we haven't had for a long time. I talked about that earlier. So there are these patterns, these currents shift from year to year. And it turns out that that's really important for reproduction and for essentially stimulating diversity among a series of different fishes. And we'll talk about that in rockfishes a little bit too. But the main thing that I wanted to bring up to you is that the convergence of these currents occurs right here off Point Concepcion, which is near Santa Barbara, and the California Bight, which is this little, it's like you took a bite out of the southern end of California, which is where LA is. And that's where there's a lot of, essentially, they call this the Southern California Eddy, which is water circulating in the bight. And that creates what's called that bight and the Channel Islands, which occur right offshore, right along here. They create a hydrodynamic front. So the water from the north is hitting and mixing the water from the south. It varies a little bit latitudinally depending on conditions in the year. Basically, they hit each other. There's a tremendous amount of exchange. And if you drive south on the coast and you hit the bight and you drive down towards LA, I mean, you jump in the water and you know it's different water. It's a lot warmer. Well, not a lot warmer, but it's warmer than the water up here in Northern California. And so this provides physical, chemical, and food web structure that's allowed surf perches different kinds of habitats. So what we call, when we say, oh, this is sympatric speciation, it may just be that it looks like it's one big puddle, but in truth, there's a tremendous amount of structure there, a tremendous amount of opportunities for species to become separated, or populations, I should say, to become separated and develop into species. And that's what we've seen with the tule perch. And it's what we'll also see with the rockfishes, which I'll come back to a little more detail on Friday. Any questions about that? Okay, onward. Another group that you should know about in this group are the labriforms. Labriforms are the wrasses, and there's one really important species off the California coast. It's the California sheephead. It's a somewhat vulnerable giant wrasse. They can live to be, I'll tell you a little bit about the life history of them. It's very interesting. They can live to be up to 20 years old, and they can grow up to about a meter long, weigh about 16 kilograms. They're found on rocky reefs and kelp forests, and they're mostly carnivorous. They feed on marine invertebrates. They've got these giant jaws with these kind of mondo teeth on the premaxilla and the dentary, and then they've got pharyngeal jaws that manage the shells and crush them so they can extract food. And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things is that they're born female and become male. So it's protogynous hermaphrodism. So this is the female over here on the left, who's smaller and has a different color morph. And as they get larger, they become male. And probably it's because they're somewhat territorial. The males establish harems around a territory of reef. And so it becomes at some point advantageous. Essentially, a fish could increase its fertility by switching from being female and producing quantities of eggs to getting really big and increasing the number of females that one can mate with. Yeah. Not this particular species, but other species do. Yeah, so it is possible. In every case of hermaphrodism, there seems to be a slightly different evolutionary strategy. But the interesting thing with fish is that it seems like sex is just like a convenience that you can switch back and forth at will, or not necessarily at will, but based upon environmental conditions. In this case, it's protogynous, so they develop into males and they stay that way based upon their size. An interesting thing about this is that setting size limits has created a female-dominated population. So there's a scarcity of these large males. Yeah, and I guess that's all I had to say. Well, I should say too, this is interesting, kind of related to your question, is if you remove an alpha male from its territory, then females start to change into sort of volitionally, into males. It's probably triggered by some kind of chemical interaction that I don't know much about. Another group in the wrasses are the cleaner wrasses. And you all should know about cleaner wrasses. You've probably seen it on TV growing up. They go up to, essentially cleaner wrasses set up stations on coral reefs, and larger fishes will come up to them. It's an amazing thing to see. So like a big grouper or another fish will come up and it'll stop in front of the station. And in the case of many of the wrasses, like the blue streak cleaner wrasse here, they're very brightly colored. They're signaling essentially like, here I am, we're open for business. And so a big fish will come by and it'll flare out its opercula and open up its mouth and just sit there and sort of just hover in this spot. And the wrasses will slowly move in and they'll start coming through the gills and the mouth. And I did take a chance on another clip here, because if you haven't ever seen it, it's just a quick clip that gives you kind of an idea. So they go right in the mouth, and they're basically picking. So fishes carry a really heavy parasite load, and they usually just live with it. That's it. That's the clip. But they go right into the mouth and into the gills, and they pick off these parasites. And it's a mutualism. You know, they both benefit from the circumstances. And then another group that I'd like you to be aware of are the parrotfish, the family Scaridae. This particular group in the labriforms so the labriforms the characteristic of the labriforms is that they have these really evolved mouth structures. And so they have these big lips and sometimes jaws. So the parrotfish feed on corals. They break them off in big chunks. That's about all I have to say about that. I'm trying to race along here. Finally, the gobiforms, the gobioforms, there's 8 families. These are mostly benthic or burrowing fishes. We have a couple of introduced ones here in California. We have a native one, which is the northern tidewater goby, which is confined to estuaries and bays across the state. One of the notable features of gobies is that their pelvic fins are fused into a disc, which allows them to suck onto surfaces. Because they're a benthic species, they can glom onto rocks or edges of reef or aquaria and hang out there. And gobies have like an amazing diversity of form. And I just wanted to show you that just to let you know. Then there's the cichlids, which also are another example of incredible diversity of form. And again, sort of the question of how do they diversify so much? Most of the population of cichlids most cichlids are found in tropical areas. And one of the most famous cichlid assemblages is in Africa, where they're confined to freshwater lakes and streams. And in Lake Victoria alone, there were many hundreds of species described. Let's see. Let me just looking for it. So these include the tilapia. I'm looking through my notes here. These include the tilapia. In Lake Victoria, 500 species. 500 species of the same family that diversified into very, very different morphs. And just to give you an example of the diversity, you can see here in the chromid species, the kind of range of some of the diversity. However, about 40% of these have gone extinct just in the past 20 or 40 years. They've mostly been done in by overfishing, deforestation, siltation, waters from land management, introduced Nile perch, introduced tilapia, have all kind of taken their toll. And so this really kind of like when I was in school in the 80s, it was still people were worried about it, but it was still being held up as this paragon of incredible fish diversity and sort of an evolutionary mystery. And now it's slowly disappearing. Clinidae is yet another, is another blenny of the bleniforms. It's the only one that's local, or the striped kelpfish. The Pleuronectiformes, I'm out of town. I'm out of town. I'm out of town and I'm out of time. So that lecture was called Too Many Fish in 50-minute period. I'll wrap up we'll wrap up the Acanthopterygians tomorrow and talk about the scorpeniforms.